I used to consider myself a big fan of the Sonic games. In fact, for the longest time I've been looking for a reason to talk about the series, but over time that interest has died down, especially after Sonic Forces. Don't worry, I'm not about to tell you about how Sonic had a rough transition into 3D. After all, I don't know crap about the early 3D Sonic games. Personally, I used to play a lot of two Sonic games in particular, Sonic Colors and Sonic CD. No one cares about you. I'm running out of words to put in this 3rd grade history lesson, so let's just skip to the important part. Sonic CD was developed for the Sega CD and released in 1993, and as for the Sega CD, that was an add-on for the Sega Genesis that played CD-based games as well as audio CDs and CD plus G discs. Sonic CD was initially conceived as an enhanced port of either Sonic 1 or its upcoming sequel. It was planned to include additional levels, a fully orchestrated soundtrack, and animated cutscenes. However, it was later decided that this Sonic game would instead be made as a new entry in the series that could take full advantage of the Sega CD. If you want to hear more about the game's development, I'd recommend you check out a video called The Making of Sonic CD. It's actually surprisingly interesting. Anyway, let's get into the game. Sonic CD takes place on the planet Little Planet. Real clever name there. I can't possibly imagine why it's called Little Planet. This planet only appears on the last month of every year, and Dr. Robotnik has it tethered to a mountain to transform it into a giant fortress. Robotnik is only doing so because he's looking for the Time Stones. Basically, they're magical colored rocks that can alter the passage of time. And in an attempt to thwart Robotnik's plans, Sonic steps in to retrieve the stones and return Little Planet to its rightful state. CD plays like a classic Sonic game would, but it feels like a unique experience compared to the others, in some ways. First of all, the controls are all as you would expect them to be, but with the addition of the new Super Peel-Out move that allows you to go faster than you would with a spin dash. This was added to aid with traveling through time, a new game mechanic exclusive to CD and fortunately a completely optional one for completing the game. The reason I'm saying this is because it does not work very well. Traveling through time is made cumbersome by the level design. There are points in certain levels where you can build up speed, but in others you are basically expected to blindly speed forward and pray that you don't hit a wall and end up having to find another past sign. And you might be wondering, why do you need to travel through time anyway? Well, specifically, you need to go to the past if you want to make a good future for each act. Once you're in the past, look for a machine that looks something like this, then destroy it and you've made a good future. After you've done this, you can travel to the future and find that the appearance of the act has changed for the better, and heck, even the act's music changes. If you go to the future without destroying this machine though, this is considered a bad future, which should be made immediately obvious by the overall appearance of everything. Things look rough and the music matches that tone. Now back to what I was saying earlier, I don't like this mechanic. At all. Even though there are segments of the levels that were designed with building speed in mind, this still isn't a good design choice, because I can see people easily missing the point of these areas, and being honest here, I always just assumed they were here for decoration until I last played it. You should be able to easily time travel at any point in the level, not just in one designated area, because this leads you to having to go all over a level looking for the past sign, then going back through everything just to find one area where you can time travel without worrying about whether or not you'll actually do it successfully. Thankfully, like I said a minute ago, this is a completely optional mechanic. You can play through the game and completely ignore it if you really want to, but that still doesn't excuse that it was poorly executed, especially considering this was supposed to be a standout mechanic for the game. And since this next bit coincides with it, let's talk about the level design next. Levels don't feel quite the same as they did in previous Sonic games, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but once again, it's how they handled it which is the problem. Sonic levels are normally designed to have a few different pathways to take, making it somewhat of a maze-like design. In Sonic CD, the level design is similar to that, but it's like the level designers took a step back from Sonic 1 and 2 just to add completely random stage elements just to throw the player off. I can understand doing this in certain situations, but in levels like Palm Tree Panic Act 2, at the end of the level, there is literally a spring placed right in the open that only serves to push you backwards to this spring, throwing you up into the air and hoping that you'll land on these spikes. I'm sorry, but this is not a clever design choice, especially for something at the end of the level. It just feels like they ran out of ideas for things to shove in, so they thought, I know, how about we put in these springs here to make the player take damage? Wouldn't that be wacky? No, it wouldn't. I might not enjoy Sonic too much, but at least there wasn't anything in it that legitimately made me question the design of the game. Now obviously, I can't speak for the entire game, but from what I've played of Sonic 2, generally it had a much better flow compared to CD. There are a lot of genuinely annoying bits and levels that just aren't fun to go through. Most of the time I can ignore them, but in zones like Wacky Workbench, no! Alright, to be fair, Wacky Workbench is only bad on your first playthrough. And forgive my nitpick here, but there's something I find kind of sloppy. In random spots, you can find rings or item boxes that are just unobtainable, and for some time I had no idea what they were there for. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like they're only supposed to be obtainable in the past or future versions of levels. See, level layouts change slightly whenever you're in a different time period, and certain things that appear unobtainable in the present are obtainable in the past. My assumption is that they left this in as an indicator of where to go back to in a level whenever you travel through time, but still, it kinda comes off as sloppy and lazy. Speaking of which, I actually find it pretty cool that levels are different in each time period. I didn't really notice anything super different that's worth pointing out about this, but it's a neat addition at the very least. You've probably been waiting for me to mention this. Don't lie to me, we all know what I'm referring to. Sonic CD's soundtrack. No, make it stop! Ah! Okay, but seriously, Sonic CD's soundtrack has two versions, which is a bit odd out of the gate. Generally though, I find the US soundtrack to be a lot less fitting. This is probably why the newer versions of Sonic CD have the Japanese soundtrack as the default, because yeah, they sound much better and it doesn't have that stupid US boss theme that haunted me as a kid. Apparently, Sega of America delayed Sonic CD's release outside of Japan by 2 months because they believed the game needed a new, more rich and complex soundtrack. If you haven't heard any of CD's soundtrack, let me give you a quick comparison. Yeah, the Japanese versions are just better all around. Special stages in Sonic CD are annoying to go through. Basically, you're thrown into a Mode 7 looking map with UFOs on it, and you have to destroy them to get the time stone. This is especially difficult to do with how hard it can be to turn on the dime to hit the last UFO. It's also made difficult by random map elements, so a lot of the special stages are you just hoping the UFOs are in a position in which your jump can just barely scratch them. And did I mention the water? Well, if you so much as step in it for half a second, your stage time goes down by around 10 seconds! And the timer keeps going down really fast the longer you're in the water. In general, these just aren't fun to go through. The bosses as well aren't very good to say the least. The first one, well, it walks forward, then backwards, and lowers the shield hands, which gives you an opportunity to hit it. I guess it's not bad, but not good either. Just pathetically easy. The next boss takes place on a pinball board. This one can either go by quickly or take you a while because you have to go up here and hit Robotnik once, then you'll be in the clear. The reason for this is that Robotnik drops down bombs every few seconds, and you can hit them by accident as they fall. If you're quick, they're easily avoidable, but occasionally you can end up almost hitting Robotnik but failing. The third boss, you get the idea at this point. None of them are anything special. I guess the second boss is kinda unique, the fourth one is okay apart from the last part of it, and the Metal Sonic race is kinda cool, but the others, meh. The final boss is really lame. The robot doesn't even look cool, it's just made to look like a plus symbol. Real threatening. Occasionally Robotnik will drop down and attempt to squish you, other times he'll try flinging the legs at you in different ways, and whenever you hit him, one of the legs will fall off. One boring final boss later, and Amy shows up for some reason, and Sonic just sits there while Robotnik's base is falling apart. I guess he has a death wish or something. Yeah, that's a pretty underwhelming ending. Like, at least the other classic Sonic games had final bosses that felt climactic, but this one is, quite a way to end off your game. The way you start and end a game are two of the most important things to consider whenever making a game, simply because the way a game starts is the player's first impression of the game. If they don't like it, they likely won't see a reason to finish it. Now, this isn't always the case, but a game's ending can also be the player's lasting impression of it, and in this case, I think the ending is a perfect way to showcase how the game isn't quite good, but not bad either. And I mean that in the subjective sense. To me, this game is a bit of a guilty pleasure, and whenever I play it casually, I can find it being a pretty enjoyable time. But that doesn't excuse some of its more glaring issues, such as the confused level design, poorly executed gimmick, and mediocre bosses. Objectively, it's hard for me to say the game is bad, since I know time traveling can be ignored, but I think a better way to describe the game would be that it's a mixed experience. If you go into Sonic CD knowing all of this, I think you can have some fun with it, but it's completely understandable if you don't. In terms of extras, Sonic CD has a sound test, cutscene player, stage select, digital audio garden, which I presume is for music, and Tails. You unlock him by beating the game once. He's a neat extra for replayability's sake, I suppose, though I don't see myself coming back to play as him very often. At the end of the day, I may not be as into Sonic as I used to, but this game still holds a lot of nostalgia value for me, with it being my favorite of the classic games I owned as a kid. At the time. I can say with confidence that that isn't the case anymore, but nonetheless, I don't think it's a terrible game. Honestly, I didn't even think I would have this much to say about it, so maybe I'll cover some more Sonic games in the future. With that all in mind, I hope you enjoyed this review thing, and I'll see you all in the next one.